Starting off at number 10, we have Magic, or Ilyana Rasputin, named after a really bad Russian guy. Not really. She first appeared in 1975 in the Giant Size X-Men issue number 1. Now, she originated from Lake Baikal, Russia, which, on a side note, by the way, is one of the oldest, most clearest lakes in the entire world. It's also one of the deepest lakes. It's the 7th largest lake in the world. Okay, a little bit of a side fact there, I kinda like that sort of stuff. Let's get back to Magic. Now Magic, she was taken to the United States of America by a villain known as Arcade. Eventually though, she was rescued and became a glorious member of the X-Men, but her powers consisted of teleportation, where she brings out these little stepping discs which originate from a dimension known as Limbo. Now she's capable of teleporting not just in small regions but across continents, and she can even teleport through space and time. Crazy, I know, which others cannot do. She also has the ability to form her own armor, which when she uses her magic more from the Limbo universe, it just gets stronger. And that's what makes people wonder, is exactly what this universe is and how does she manage to harness this energy? It's really unknown. However, she's a sorceress of the Limbo universe, and that's all we got. As a matter of fact, she ended up absorbing all of the Limbo universe, which pretty much nowadays when she teleports, weird images of ghosts and dragons and other creatures now appear. I have no idea. It's comic books. Number 9, we've got Michael Pointer, or simply known as Omega. He's actually got a few different names as well, I'll get into that. Now originally he was just a simple postman before he found out that he was a mutant. He's capable of not just absorbing people and mutants for their powers, but he can also take on personalities, that's right. His powers have always been extremely strong that his suit had to be made by Reed Richards so he could regulate his powers. There was also a point in his superhero career where he absorbed the power of 50 mutants and Zorn. Zorn merged with Michael Pointer and ended up killing almost all the members of Alpha Flight. The thing with Michael Pointer is that he does not need to touch mutants to take the power, he could just be right near them. It's kinda silly. And he actually managed to almost take all of the powers from every single mutant on Earth. He's kinda like Superman of absorption, an unstoppable machine with his powers having unknown origins. Yep. I could write for comic books. Number 8, we got Phantom X, which is probably the coolest name of all of these guys, I'm gonna be honest. Now he first appeared in 2002 in the new X-Men series number 128, created out of the Weapon Plus program and acted as a super sentinel for a while. The Weapon Plus program made a group of people or mutants with techno-organic organisms being fused with nanotechnology of a sentinel. I don't really know what that means, but Phantom X was born from his mother, who was one of these Weapon Plus made people, when she was fertilized with nano machines. So his powers, they're interesting because he has a nervous system known as the EVA, which can become external, and when the EVA actually leaves him, he becomes more powerful because he doesn't even feel his injuries. Also, the EVA can shapeshift, it identifies as a woman. Phantom X also even has a backup internal nervous system in case EVA gets damaged. Phantom X also has the ability to go into a state of mind and do his own self-repairs. He's an amazing marksman, and his bullets apparently never miss because they are laced with mutant skin. At one point, he was capable of even skewing reality with illusions. Weird. Number 7, we got Glob Herman. Now the coolest guy, but the lamest name at the same time. First appeared in what was known as the new X-Men Volume 2 138. The prime of Miss Emma Frost May 2013 issue. Now this guy is made up of essentially living wax. It's known as bioparaffin. And his internal organs are pretty much viewable. You can see it, so you can see his bones. They float inside. It's really cool. Now bioparaffin apparently reacts to heat extremely well, and what we do know that this stuff gives him great strength, and at one point he acted as a major heat shield for the X-Men Academy class when they transported to Sword Base. At one point he joined fellow classmates in the Omega game. Glob ended up attacking civilians and joined in the fight against the X-Men. Now the X-Men succeeded in taking him down by burning off that wax layer. He also is known to flick his wax off in small portions, and besides real awesome strength, we don't really know what else it does. Number 6, Shatterstar. I do do like the name of this. First appeared in 1991, a part of the New Mutants series. Now, he still remained very popular. As a matter of fact, he was in the second Deadpool movie. He originated from a planet called Mojo World, which was also a century in the future and in another dimension, and I'll get to that and his powers in a short bit. Basically, he's a genetically engineered individual, and he learned to fight in the arenas on Mojo World. Now, for his powers, he has superhero strength, he can time travel, and also dimension travel. Pretty awesome. He also has extreme senses, keeping him alert, and his weapon, which is a staff, is extremely strong. At one point, he was capable of hitting the Thing into a building, which is like, what? I don't know how you do that. Because he was also engineered, his bones are hollow, so he can go really fast. As a matter of fact, he's expected to be able to dodge machine gun fire at point blank range. He's also extremely intelligent and can learn things like languages very quickly.
Up next in our number 5 spot, Rogue. Rogue may be one of the more prominent heroic members of the X-Men, but once upon a time she was a villain. Or at least debuted as such. After her mutant powers manifested, she was tracked down by Mystique, who at the time was dating the precognitive character Destiny, who had advised her to look for Rogue. Chris Claremont had initially intended to have Mystique be Rogue's real mother, FYI. Anywho, Rogue joined up with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Over the years, the character has been in a slew of different romantic relationships that often left fans scratching their heads, mainly because they either occur on alternate Earths, but are talked about so much that fans confuse what's canon, or because all of a sudden Rogue can touch someone that she couldn't touch before and now they're knocking boots because of it. Case in point, Colossus. In X-Men issue 100, Rogue discovers that she can touch him, so naturally they make out, which leads to a relationship. This caused quite the stir since in the past, Colossus was actually affected by her powers. Now let's take a look at Age of Apocalypse. She was married to Magneto and had kids with him after ditching Gambit. People freaked out over it. In the main 616 universe, she was retconned to have been in a relationship with Sentry when it was revealed that he existed. In the 2013 Age of Ultron event, which had nothing to do with the MCU film might I add, she was married to Havoc and they led the Morlocks. And you know what else is confusing about Rogue? The number of times she's absorbed a power that is so immense that it eventually gets retconned. It happened in House of M when she absorbed Geneviève's cosmic powers. Up next, number 4, Fire. Fire, aka Beatrice DaCosta, first appeared in Super Friends issue 25 back in 1979. She lands a spot on this list for 2 specific reasons. First off, why is she green if she is fire? Second, and arguably more confusing, is she a queer character or not? Let's start with the former. Back when she first appeared in the comics, we're talking pre-Crisis on Infinite Earths, she was known as Green Fury. Her powers of green pyrokinesis were birthed from Brazilian mysticism, hence why her flames are green. She has the ability to become a being purely composed of living green fire, which is different than the Human Torch, whose flames are fiery plasma, or rather an aura of fire, 2 different things. Post-Crisis, Beatrice's name was changed to Green Flame, which she then changed yet again to Fire after joining up with the Justice League International team. Now, let's discuss the latter point of befuddlement. She had some serious romantic tension with Ice Maiden, a character who replaced Ice, who was Fire's best pal and teammate on the Justice League after Ice was killed. Fire and Ice, get it, huh? Ice Maiden and her had an on and off again flirtation that seemed more like Beatrice was obsessed with Ice Maiden rather than it just being a reciprocated flirtation. There was also a whole series of panels in Justice League America issue 103 that queerbaited the crap out of the 2 of them, but then played it off as Ice Maiden just trying to give Beatrice ice back. Their story would carry on with them almost always getting intimate, one of them saying, "Is this what you want?" And then that want is just some sort of fake out queerbaiting. Eventually Ice Maiden would come out as bisexual, but Fire would remain lost in the ether of terrible queerbait. Moving on to number 3, Barbara Gordon. While DC's Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, doesn't seem like a perplexing character initially, there is one facet of her history that is arguably baffling. We're talking about how exactly the character lost her ability to walk, and how exactly she gained it back. Not only is that one of the most controversial aspects of her character, and one of the hot topics that arose during the start of the New 52 when she was revealed to have become mobile once again as Batgirl, but it also is something that can be a little confusing when you look at exactly how the whole situation unraveled. Barbara Gordon would become paralyzed from the waist down thanks to the actions of the Joker in The Killing Joke, a story that is technically not canon and occurs in an alternate universe, and makes Barbara a mere plot device. The story isn't about her, and her mutilation and assault is merely to advance Batman and Jim Gordon's stories and motivations. Writers Kim Yale and John Ostrander, after reading The Killing Joke, would end up working with DC to revive the character as disabled rather than have her fall into obscurity, thus creating the persona Oracle. The Killing Joke was written to not be canon, and included some post-crisis characters that were no longer canon. Yet, it ended up becoming one of the most defining stories of Barbara's history, and since has been really wishy-washy in terms of not being canon and then becoming canon again. The whole thing Very confusing. But becoming Oracle did a lot of positive things for the character. She became more intelligent as writers relied on her other abilities that previously had been barely touched upon. Sure, she was a librarian, but often she was written as more of a stereotype, a woman who served a greater purpose to the male characters she supported narratively. It also provided representation as a handicapped character who was still out there fighting crime, making an impact as a superhero, which was really cool. Then, when she regained the ability to walk in the New 52, the character was said to have still suffered the events of the Killing Joke, something that remained canon despite being a story from an alternate universe originally. Barbara had undergone extreme physiotherapy and surgery, and her disability had only ailed her for 3 years rather than decades. All in all, it's a little hard to follow. Moving on to number 2, Emma Frost. Being a story. Emma Frost is a character who is known for using her sexuality to her advantage. While we're not going to get into the whole history behind her objectification in comics versus her ownership of and agency over that sexuality, that's a whole other number for a different list. What we will discuss is the nuances of her powers. For starters, Emma was once considered an Omega level mutant. That is no longer the case according to House of X issue 1, which left her out of the Omega count. Her powers mainly consist of 2 overarching abilities. She has immense telepathic powers and can transform her body into an organic diamond state that gives her enhanced strength and durability, but also suppresses her telepathy. This power manifested when Genosha was destroyed, and this form is self-sustaining, meaning she doesn't need food or water to survive in it. She is also numb to emotion, pain, and empathy while in this form. Now she has been both a villain and a hero, and has teamed up with the X-Men and led them once upon a time, but often is a confusing character in the sense that she's jumped back and forth with her allegiances over the years multiple times. And last but not least, and at number 1, Black Canary. Black Canary first appeared in 1947's Flash Comics issues 86, and is a clusterfuck of confusion. In the Golden Age, the character had the alter ego of Dina Drake, who went by the alias of Black Canary and fought alongside her husband, Detective Larry Lance. She didn't have superpowers. Rather, she was more of a vigilante who often posed as a criminal in order to infiltrate gangs. Later on, she was given a superpower called the Canary Cry, which was a high-powered sonic scream capable of incapacitating the likes of Superman. Seems straightforward, right? Haha, time for things to get messy. After the Golden Age, like the rest of DC's Golden Age heroes, Black Canary and her husband Larry were regulated to Earth 2. But in 1969, Larry was killed, and Dina decided that she was going to move to Earth 1 in the aftermath, where she joins the Justice League and then gets it on with Green Arrow. Weird. This is when she develops the Canary Cry. In the Silver Age, Black Canary then became 2 separate entities, Dina Drake Lance and Dina Laurel Lance, the former being the mother of the latter. The younger Black Canary became the focus in the comics, and she was the one who retained the metahuman Canary Cry ability. By the time the New 52 rolled around, those 2 characters were amalgamated into one, known as Dina Drake. In addition to that, if that wasn't confusing enough, her CW adaptations are also perplexing. There's multiple iterations: Dina Laura Lance, Sarah Lance, the White Canary, and Dina Drake, all portrayed by different actors.
Number 10. Phage. Phage first appeared in Venom Lethal Protector number 4, which was a 6-issue miniseries from 1993, but he wasn't named until 2012 in Carnage USA number 2. Phage is one of 5 symbiotes forcefully bred out of Venom. The siblings are Agony, Riot, Lasher, and Scream. The Phage would later combine with 3 of its siblings, Riot, Lasher, and Agony, to form the better known Hybrid symbiote. So from then on, we're dealing with Hybrid and Hybrid's bondings. This all came about because of the success of the first Venom offspring, Carnage, and while people always want to repeat success. However, few of the symbiote offshoots have proved as popular or long-lasting as Carnage. Carnage first debuted in The Amazing Spider-Man number 361 in 1992. That was as a full appearance. Like Venom before him, he had had a cameo appearance the issue prior. And also like Venom before him, his host, Cletus Cassidy, had been pre-established. All factors on top of his design and absolute bloodlust that made him much more memorable of a character than Phage to most. Still, Marvel has been riding the more and more symbiotes ride ever since, and just look at what they've got Kate's doing with Absolute Carnage. Number 9. Ruin Venom. Runes, depends how you want to say it. This symbiote comes to us from Ruin vs. Venom number 1 in 1995, and has direct connection to Planet of the Symbiotes, which was a 5-issue event from 1995, and actually had to do with the fallout over the creation of the 5 forcefully bred symbiotes we just talked about. Also, the planet in question is Earth, don't get excited. Ruins is a murder mystery, which I'm about to ruin, so heads up. Ruin Venom involves a symbiote that survived the seeming death of all invading symbiotes from the planet arc, and bonds to Ruin. So, who is Ruin? Well, Ruin was an extreme vampire-like creature created in the 90s who debuted in Sludge number 1. He begins framing Venom for murders around town by writing Venom in huge letters next to the victim. Copying Carnage much? Of course the media falls for it. However, Ruin Venom runs into some problems, not only when real Venom comes to investigate, but also when Ruin begins to suspect some of his actions are being influenced. Rune. Number 8. Kroba. Kroba first debuted in Venom Seed of Darkness number 1 in 1997. Are you picking up on just how much Venom stuff was going on in the 90s? There was no escape. If you didn't like Venom, Godspeed. Side note, Kroba's heading on the cover is The Living Darkness, and inside the book, he's called The Abyss That Walked. Pretty neat. So this is supposed to be a story that occurs before the current timeline, well, the then current timeline. Marvel will do this sometimes when they have a tale that really won't slot anywhere but isn't strong enough for a what if, or they're going through a period where they're not publishing what ifs. It's a pretty simple story. Kroba bonds with a scientist, Dr. Don Levy. It tells him that it will help maintain knowledge, the usual, but it tricks him. It's up to Eddie Brock to defeat him. I'm kidding, Eddie isn't Venom. In this story, he's still a not as good as Peter Parker photographer, so he observes and ponders on the nature of man and monster. This one is less hard to understand and more easy to miss. Number 7. ZZZXX. Yes, I said Z. It's Canada up here. This is a more recent addition who debuted in X-Men Kingbreaker number 2 in 2009. This symbiote is a Clintar and a mutant, and it eats brains. It was discovered by the Shi'ar. The most interesting thing about this symbiote, aside from its rather random letter-centric name, is how it was weaponized against the Charles Xavier from the Cancerverse, which was a realm introduced in the Realm of Kings crossover comic 2010, a universe ruled by evil organic masses. So the Xavier in this universe was a planet-sized brain, and for a brain eater like ZZZXX, a match made in heaven. This could really have hit the zombie element harder with the symbiote, but I mean, they have Marvel Zombies for that. Number 6. Mania. Mania first debuted in Venom number 1 in 2003. This symbiote is a clone of Venom, which given Marvel's history with dragging out perfectly good clone sagas until the entire creative staff behind them is permanently traumatized, I'm amazed a direct clone like this hadn't happened sooner. Also, it was only named Mania in 2011 when Venom relaunched. So this clone was created using a piece of Venom's tongue, which is hardly surprising. That tongue is everywhere. From the start, the symbiote was sadistic, refusing to bond with awkward hosts, instead torturing and killing them, sometimes by pulling up the worst fears from their memories and then acting on those. The thing with Mania is that it's hard to track, because a bunch of things that happen, such as it being reabsorbed into Eddie's symbiote, are no longer considered canon. Now Mania is just kind of around and brought out when necessary, but since Kate's and the ridiculous amount of symbiotes he's been creating, we'll see how some of these other symbiotes fare.
Number 5, we got Gold Balls. Probably the worst name for a hero, but I mean, let's be perfectly honest, it's self-explanatory. He pretty much takes these gold balls that he can just produce and projects them from any part of his body. On top of that, he can call in an infinite amount of them, and like he can not only shoot them in a straight line, but he can also direct them. Pretty weird kind of ability. I mean, magic balls that can also grow in size. Wouldn't the ladies love that? Yeah. Number 4, we got Blink. Now, a member of Generation X, also in the film Days of Future Past, which is my favorite X-Men film, if you guys really want to know that. Now, she's extremely unstable. Sounds like a lot of mutants these days, but oh well. Now, she has the ability to not just teleport herself, but other people around her, which sometimes seems all too convenient. Now, this ability makes her being able to also teleport objects and other things that she can use against her enemies. As for how she does this, we don't really know. Number 3, Forge, a man of great technology, and not just good at inventing things, but he can also perceive mechanical energy in action, which basically means he can look at something and go, ah, that's how you use it. Pretty much he's a guy that just went to Harvard University for engineering and walked out and said, yep, I'm smart. Actually, to be perfectly honest, it's not realistically through intelligence, more or less like technological instinct. Sometimes he'll make something or figure something out and he doesn't really know why, and then he has to go back and he's like, oh, that's how I did it. On top of that, he's also a user of magic. He uses Native American magic, but simple, he's just like an Iron Man, just different. Number 2, you've got Dazzler. Now she is one of the weirdest. I mean, I don't understand any of her powers. I don't know if she's still being made, but either way, apparently she can transduce sonic vibrations. She uses a range of frequencies, she uses the audible spectrum, and uses sound pressure levels. What does that mean? Well, apparently she uses sound and music because music is very pleasing to her. Yeah, that's right. She uses this energy to create light waves that can either put like a trance effect on her enemies. She can also blind her enemies. She is incapable of being blinded, and she also can create holograms and convert this energy to fly. How she does this, nobody really knows. Basically, it's a lot of BS, but it was probably designed by a music student. Number 1, we've got Rogue. I know a lot of you guys are gonna go, come on, really? But realistically, for me, I don't really understand Rogue. I mean, you guys already know a lot about Rogue, so I'm not going to get into the details of her, but we really don't understand her, powers to a degree. And one of the biggest problems is that she's had a different amount of abilities through time, and that's what gets really conflicting. Now, we all know her that she has the ability to absorb other people's powers and other mutants' powers, so basically that means no kissy kissy for her. Thank you. However, in some cases, she can also not just absorb their powers, but their memories, their personalities. Apparently, she can duplicate herself into her victims. So I'm like, yeah, I feel like she's just the vampire of mutants, At one point, she got so powerful she could do an instant death touch. After the Messiah complex, she had the ability to control her powers, so yeah, she could get it on and not kill somebody. It's great. She also apparently, absorbed Miss Marvel's powers at one point, and even Wonder Man's powers, which she had a problem doing that in the past. But one thing is, when she absorbs the powers, her victims are sometimes unconscious for a while, and yeah, how she gets her powers, we don't really know.
In at number 10, Danielle Moonstar. Danielle Moonstar is a confusing character, period. She's an individual who has been through multiple iterations of aliases, to the point where it's almost comical. Danielle Danny Moonstar first appeared in the New Mutants in 1982, and is a Cheyenne superhero who is generally associated with the X-Men. She was initially codenamed Psyche and later became Mirage. And her abilities history is a long one. Let's start with her mutant powers. She was a former empath who lost her abilities to communicate with animals and create three-dimensional images of visual concept within her mind and the minds of others. Like I said, she lost that. Generally, she could manifest people's fears or desires as realistic illusions. She lost those powers on M-Day and then regained them after being infected with the transmute virus, but then was also cured of it by Dark Beast. See what I mean? It's already confusing. She briefly could make telepathic images manifest as psionic energy, allowing them to become tangible entities of solid psionic force, but that was limited. She would carry around a dream spear with her to destroy them when she was done with them. Unfortunately though, these powers would give her blinding headaches. Then, she became a Valkyrie, and was endowed with the Valkyrie power to perceive death. She would lose those powers though when Asgard fell, but then made a deal with Hela to get them back. And, in the past, she was capable of manipulating quantum energy. Moving on to number 9, Black Hood. When you hear the name Black Hood, a couple of different things may pop into your mind. For starters, it's a name that likely elicits a pulp character. Mysterious and criminal perhaps in nature, a vigilante maybe. Now for those of you immersed in pop culture sensations, you might think of the CW TV series Riverdale and its mildly absurd Black Hood serial killer storyline. If you don't watch Riverdale, yes, that's a thing. Well, the Black Hood comic character actually has relations to that latter association, since he was a creation of Archie Comics. First appearing in Top Notch Comics issue 9 in 1940, he became rather popular, getting his own title called Black Hood Comics in 1943, which was a pulp magazine that ran for 11 issues before it was retitled and shifted its focus to being an all-humor title. During his time under Archie Comics, he was merely a great fighter and detective, but after the character was revived by DC's Impact Comics imprint in 1991, he gained a different set of powers, magically increased physical abilities and awareness. So what does that even mean? Well, we'll get to that in a sec, because here's where it gets even more befuddling. Impact had 3 Black Hoods. The first was a bitter vigilante who was killed off in their first issue of Black Hood. The second was a high school student who took over the hood but then abandoned it. And then the third was a former mobster who killed the first Black Hood. Whenever somebody wore the hood, they would get heightened awareness and increased strength, speed, and agility. The real kicker though? The hood was believed to be cursed, with each individual who wore it eventually succumbing to death, and the hood finding its way into the hands of a new individual who had the potential to take up the helm. Moving on to 8, the Thunderer. The Thunderer is a character who was published by Timely Comics in the Golden Age, the predecessor of Marvel. He's a dude whose superpower was high impact voice amplification. In other words, dude shouted real loud. So let's backtrack here for a sec. Thunderer first appeared in 1941 in Daring Mystery Comics issue 7, and was a fellow named Jerry Carstairs, a radio operator frustrated that the US wasn't dealing with crime or Nazi saboteurs, so he took the law into his own hands. After learning of a Nazi infiltration operation that was abusing the radio station he worked at, he adopted the Thunderer persona, a costume with a built-in microphone, and took them down. He is capable of deafening people or leveling buildings with his sonic scream. Sure, you could call him a predecessor to Black Bolt's perhaps, on a creative level, but let's be real here. How exactly he was able to create a built-in microphone to do that in the 40s and level buildings is beyond me. Needless to say, he fell into obscurity, with one of his only claims to fame now being that he appeared in an animated Spider-Man series in an episode called Six Forgotten Warriors. At least his costume looked kinda cool though, you gotta give him that. And at 7, Jazz. If you thought Thunderer was a character who had a silly power, get ready to wrap your mind around Jazz. No, not the music, but the character. Jazz, whose real name is John Xander, is a blue-skinned mutant who wanted to be a rapper, but was not good at it. He became a drug runner instead, selling toad juice, which was a drug made from the secretions of another mutant. Gross. After M-Day, he was one of the few who retained his powers, and later, while trying to buy drugs, he was killed by Johnny D via a miniature voodoo doll. Needless to say, dude has a bit of a mockable storyline. So why is he confusing? Because he is a low-level mutant who doesn't actually have an ability. His mutation is that his skin is blue. That's it. I mean, maybe he could rap you to death with his mediocrity, but technically that is not a superpower. That's just a depressing character trait. And at 6, Kylun. There are plenty of animal-themed superheroes out there in the world of comics. Generally, their powers derive from their animal persona, as if they were some sort of anthropomorphic creature who had the abilities of said creature. We're not talking furries here, friends. Don't you dare make that joke in the comments. For example, take a look at Beast. Even Wolverine has similarities to his alias's namesake. But then there is Kylun, who is slightly misleading. Sure, he looks like a cat creature of sorts, feline in nature, but that has no relation to his abilities. He's got claws and fangs which he can use in battle, but his true power is something unrelated. He can mimic sounds. Literally any sound that he hears, Kylun, aka Colin McKay, can replicate it thanks to his superpowered vocal cords. You weren't expecting that, were you? Moving on to 5, Adaptability. The Hulk is one of the most adaptable heroes in comic books. Now, because of the speed in which he regenerates tissue, he's able to survive some of the harsher climates, like pressure underwater or the vacuum of outer space. But here is the fun part. He has a gland in his body that creates oxygen to fill his lungs. So when he's underwater or when he's in space, he can function without fear of losing air. His body is also built to sustain extreme amounts of pressure, hence why he's able to walk along the bottom of the ocean, which is a thing he did once. Said need a lot in this video. And at 4, Punching Through Time. I love a good punch through time number. The Hulk is proven capable of punching his way through temporal and spatial dimensions. Weird, right? The science behind this one is a little bit sketchy, for being honest, hence why it finds a place on this list. Now, in the Incredible Hulk issue 135, the character came up against Kang the Conqueror and followed him through the time stream and started punching through it so hard that he made it through to the past. In issue 304, he would be banished to another dimension and encountered old foes, the UFOs, which is their name, and punched Ironclad so hard that it would shake the entire multiverse. He also once tore the fabric of reality by using his thunderclap, or rather a sonic clap, which used sound waves that discharged enough of a burst that they could rip apart the very seams of reality, as seen in Incredible Hulk issue 126. He's so strong that he can f with your reality, essentially. So maybe don't piss off the Hulk ever. I mean, you wouldn't want to, because you'd probably like you anyway, so. And at 3, honing in on New Mexico. While that might sound like a very strange ability, it's one that makes perfect sense for the Hulk. So, the Hulk is capable of honing in on the place of his superpower origin. This is something we learned about thanks to the Hulk of Future Imperfect, Maestro, a future timeline version of the big green monster who had survived a nuclear war and became a tyrant overlord of sorts, dominating over the planet, collecting trophies of other dead superheroes and villains. He was also completely insane by this point thanks to the extreme amounts of radiation he was absorbing. Anywho, when the Hulk defeats Maestro, he does it by leading him back in time so that he's destroyed by the same gamma bomb that created the Hulk. Therefore, homing in on this spot in New Mexico is because of Maestro's spirit calling out to him. This also ties into 2 other supernatural abilities. So, let's move on to those. In at 2, he can see ghosts. So that whole ability to home in on his origin spot in New Mexico, how Maestro's spirit had called out to him since it's the place where he died, well, this is kind of tied to this too, and his ability to see ghosts. Now, this was actually a latent ability of the Hulk's, which first appeared after he accidentally killed his father, whose ghost then haunted him for a while. There's been a bit of a debate as to how exactly the Hulk can see ghosts, hence the confusion surrounding this power. But one answer comes in the form of our next number, and our final number, in at 1, Astral Sight. The Hulk can see individuals on the astral plane. Now, this was first explored in the Defenders when the Hulk interacted with Doctor Strange, who was astral projecting at the time. Others could not perceive Strange's astral form, only Hulk could. While some have linked this ability to Maestro, a more plausible theory has arisen in the form of this ability of the Hulk's being a convenient plot point, which, I mean, Yeah. Now, in order to help bring the members of that iteration of Defenders together in a way that made sense, certain editorial choices were made, including having the Hulk be able to see Doctor Strange. But in the story world though, Doctor Strange would speculate that it was a power derivative of some sort of primitive or animalistic aspect of the Hulk's mind, that he could sense a fundamental wrongness in the environment around him, although there wasn't much further elaboration on it. Now, others chalk this up to the fact that he has a heightened sense of perception, and how that allows him to hunt and fight off characters the likes of the Wendigo. Plausible theories. I kinda like the last one. And at 10, he can create more Hulks. No, we are not talking about procreation here, friends. Hulk's blood has the ability to not only heal others, but to turn them into Hulk monsters as well. Case in point, Bruce Banner's cousin Jennifer Walters. Jennifer became She-Hulk after Bruce gave her a blood transfusion, something that neither had anticipated. She had been shot by an enemy of her father's, who is the LA County Sheriff, and luckily, Bruce was in town and had the same blood type as her. His radioactive blood mixed with her anger over the situation would transform her into She-Hulk, but her powers were a more reduced version of Bruce's, and she could eventually control her transformations too. Now, the only hang up with this ability of the Hulk's is that in order for it to successfully work, the other individual needs to have DNA that is a close match to Bruce Banner's, meaning it's only really gonna work for relatives, but still cool nonetheless. Up next at 9, Power Source. The Hulk's body is always creating and radiating gamma energy, which makes him like a walking gamma battery, as noted in the Incredible Hulk issue 103 from Volume 1. Now, on several occasions, the radiation within the Hulk's body has been used as an energy source. While that sounds really neat, it can also cause devastating effects, so maybe think twice about asking him to help you charge your phone. In World War Hulk, this occurred when Hulk got so angry that he nearly smashed the planet to smithereens, and in the process, because of how pissed off he was, his body began to emit radiation. Conrad Zaxxon once tried to use the Hulk as a battery for weapons that he wanted to take over the Earth with. Now, the Hulk can force feed large amounts of this gamma radiation to overload machines, or to drain enemies of their own gamma radiation, like he did to the second Red Hulk. The exact extent of how much radiation the Hulk can control at any given time has yet to be determined. In at number 8, he can survive nuclear holocausts. In the one-shot comic book called Hulk: The End, we see Bruce Banner and the Hulk roaming a desolate version of Earth that has suffered a war that ended due to a violent nuclear holocaust. Hulk and Banner are the last ones remaining alive, all thanks to the Hulk, who is invulnerable enough to survive the fallout. Banner and the Hulk actually despise each other though, and eventually Banner lets himself die, unable to live like that anymore. After Bruce passes on, the Hulk is trapped. If he ever turns back into Banner, he would die as well. It is all very tragic. But the reason why we take you to this depressing timeline is to discuss the fact that the Hulk's invulnerability and endurance allows for him to survive in such harsh environments, to outlive the effects of mass nuclear radiation. He actually grows stronger from more radiation, making exposure to deadly amounts of radiation a beneficial thing for him, although it does tend to drive him insane, but more on that later. And at 7, regeneration. Hulk has the ability to grow new tissue at an exceptionally fast rate, and to regenerate older tissue. He has had one of the fastest regenerative healing factors in the entire Marvel universe, having demonstrated that if he concentrates hard enough, he can grow back parts of his body, like layers and layers of skin in a matter of seconds. Now, this can occasionally cause some problems for him. When he fought against Speed Freak, the villain hit him with metal barbs, and the Hulk's skin grew over the barbs, causing it to tear again after the regrowth. It's gotta hurt. Then, in Hulk: The End, he was able to regenerate parts of his body that radioactive cockroaches consumed, which also doesn't sound fun. Plus, the angrier he gets, the faster he can regenerate, so kind of a nifty ability to have. And at number 6, resurrection. In Civil War II, the Inhuman Ulysses has a vision of the Hulk killing all of the Avengers. When Bruce Banner, the Hulk's former alter ego, is approached about the situation, he's confronted by members of the Avengers, and Hawkeye in the process kills Banner. But shortly after Civil War II ended, the Hulk had resurrected Banner, as seen in Avengers No Surrender. The comic depicts a whole sequence of all of the times Banner and the Hulk have faced death, intercut with the image of a doorway opening, implying that's how Banner's mind returns after the Hulk's body regenerates once he's been killed off. Does that mean, like, even of old age he'll never really truly die? Or does his mind have to still be, you know, functional and wanting to live? It's a curious question. And at 5, Metamorpho. Metamorpho is a head scratcher. Also known as the Element Man, Metamorpho is a DC character who helped found the Outsiders, and first appeared in 1965 in The Brave and the Bold issue 57. He was a product of the popularity of Fantastic Powers, a successor to Doom Patrol and Metal Men, and his abilities consisted of elemental shapeshifting, super strength, and invulnerability. While those last two are pretty straightforward, it's the shapeshifting that we're concerned with. When you think elemental, You think fire, earth, water, air, right? Well, Metamorpho is more complex than that, which often causes confusion surrounding the character. He can transmute his body into a variety of elemental compounds that he can then form to his will. In other words, he is a much more science-based hero. Now initially he was restricted to elements that naturally occur within the human body, but over time that became less and less of a limitation, with writers allowing him to assume forms of gas, liquids, or solid states. He can alter the shapes and consistencies of these elements to form complex compounds, and can shape parts and portions of his body rather than being forced to change it in its entirety. He is capable of forming himself into complex structures the likes of tanks and a bicycle, or more ambiguous stuff like a cloud. Moving on to number 4, Super Teen. On one of our previous lists we mentioned Pureheart, the superhero version of Archie's comics namesake, Archie Andrews. He is a superhero who is pure of heart, if his name didn't give that away. And what exactly he is capable of is questionable at best. As long as he remains pure of heart, he has superpowers. You guys should probably go watch part 3 of this list if you're curious. Now for those of you who already have, at this number we have one of his companions, the superhero version of Betty Cooper, who comes to be when Betty twists her magical ponytail. Actually, her powers are supposed to be similar to Pureheart's, which, yes, just makes her more confusing. She has been described as a hero who can, I quote, do just about anything with her snappy looking costume and jet belt. So we know she can fly, we know she has super strength, we know that she is super durable, and we know her powers come to be when she witnesses someone's life in danger. For example, Archie about to get hit by a truck, Archie about to fall off a ledge, Archie about to hurt himself in pretty much any way possible, because apparently he is super klutzy. Or at least he is when Super Teen's around. But aside from that, she just tends to be a bit vague in her portrayals, hence her inclusion on this list. And just baffling conceptually in general. It's like Archie Comics is like, let's make our characters into superheroes. That's a great idea, and it just didn't really work out. And at 3, Extrano. Extrano is a character who didn't receive the best of treatment in his early years. A DC character, Extrano first appeared in Millennium issue 2 in 1988 and is a superhero magician, although many might remember him for what he's generally mocked for. A magical gay character who was attacked by an AIDS vampire called Hemogoblin that then made him HIV positive. You can't make this up. Needless to say, the portrayal was not a great one, especially for the queer community in a time when there was plenty of misconceptions about AIDS. He was a character who was selected by the Guardians of the Universe to take part in an experiment in human evolution, which made him into a powerful magician, whose sorcery abilities were never really fully elaborated upon. He would dress in loose, colorful garments, refer to himself as Auntie, and was pretty much coded as a homosexual character, who later would acquire a powerful skull crystal that made him more masculine, which was largely believed to be the result of negative comments from readers. His magic consisted of stage tricks, using ping pong balls to outwit his foes. He could levitate and fire blasts of energy from his hands, but not much of what he could do was explained in great detail. He was very much the token magician character. Now these days he's gotten a bit more of a makeover, although his abilities are still quite ambiguous. He appeared in DC Rebirth, working with Midnighter to locate Apollo's soul in hell. According to writer Steve Orlando, who himself is bisexual, I quote, with a book like Midnighter and Apollo, which from cover to cover is a love letter to queer characters and our struggle to live, be visible and loved, it felt right to return one of the first and reintroduce him to a new generation. Maybe there's hope for Extrano after all. Up next at 2, Doorman. Doorman, aka Damar Davis, is a Marvel character who first appeared in West Coast Avengers Volume 2, Issue 46 in 1989, and was a member of the Great Lakes Avengers. He responded to Mr. Immortal's ad for Heroes for the Great Lakes team, who, on paper, can generate portals, and can fly via skis, which yes is weird. He is intangible and can also bring souls to the afterlife. It's a confusing set of skills, right? But here's where it gets more perplexing. His portal ability has a restriction. He can teleport people through walls, with his body serving as that portal, hence the name Doorman. Concerning the skis, he can summon them at will, although that doesn't make them any less confusing. If anything, his most useful talent is delivering souls to oblivion, but even then, he can only do it if that person is deceased, and he becomes only visible to that soul. It's like his creators didn't really think the portal ability was enough, so they decided to use the more mythical version of the Doorman, or Gatekeeper, and make him all about death, which, for the record, was a power of his added after the fact. And finally, in at number 1, Rainbow Girl. Ending off our list with an inherently sexist creation, we have Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl is an extraterrestrial character who first appeared in 1963 in DC's Adventure Comics issue 309. She is a metahuman who wields the power of the mysterious emotional spectrum, resulting in unpredictable mood swings. You can't make this up. It's like my mantra for this whole series. She would tap into colors that would result in different moods. Red being anger, blue being hope, green being willpower. She once also exhibited the ability to create a pheromone field that surrounded her in a giant rainbow and gave her an irresistible personality. Ugh. But here's where it gets utterly fascinating. Even DC doesn't know what the hell she can do. According to Jeff Johns, during the Blackest Night event, he noted that Rainbow Girl doesn't fully understand her powers and uses them more for fun. Just kill me now. And at number 10, interdimensional travel, The Flash. Complex powers, yay! The Flash's second iteration in the form of Silver Age baby Barry Allen tends to take the laws of science and just twist them, making them arguably inconceivable in our real world, but really neat to see on the panels of DC's comics. Of course, that lends itself to be a tad confounding. Such is the Flash's interdimensional travel powers. Now, according to the comics, the Flash can vibrate his body at a molecular level, which allows him to transfer himself between dimensions. Now, initially this was something that could only be achieved by his cosmic treadmill, but in later years he gained the ability to do this himself by increasing the intensity and speed of his vibrations. Now, to make things a little bit more complicated, adjusting those two factors acts as a means for a lot of the things that Barry can do, but more on that in a bit. Up next, number 9, talking to fish. Aquaman, of course. While Aquaman's ability to communicate with aquatic life has long been the butt of many jokes aimed at the DC's King of Atlantis, there's actually been some major retconning over the years when it comes to the scope of this ability and how it's defined, and just in general how people understand it. It's not just like chatting with a fish. For example, in the New 52, in the first issue of Aquaman, Arthur Curry is chilling at a restaurant when he's mildly harassed by other customers there, who make a point of saying that everyone knows Aquaman talks to fish. Arthur does not hesitate to clear this up, noting that, I quote, "Fish don't talk. Their brains are too primitive to carry on a conversation. I reach into their midbrains and telepathically push them to help me out. Squids, sharks, eels, it's all the same, though dolphins are another story." Now, many of the jokes surrounding Aquaman, primarily spawned from the Super Friends cartoon of the past, were dealt with head-on by Jeff Johns in this series, and it was actually a pretty solid start to the Aquatic Heroes New 52 comic. Now let's flash forward though to the Justice League Aquaman Drowned Earth Special 1 and Justice League issue 11, more recent Rebirth comics. DC started exploring grander concepts here. And similar to Barry Allen's Speed Force connection, Arthur Curry has a connection to something called Life Force, which apparently, according to Scott Snyder, could suggest that Aquaman might have the ability to communicate with all life. And yes, that is still pretty confusing, especially when DC has noted that they haven't changed Aquaman's powers, but rather just want to expand the meaning of them. Right. But hey, he doesn't talk to fish one-on-one, so there you go. That solves that question. Just leave it as the New 52 explanation. I'm sure people will be fine with that. Up next to number 8, one of my personal favorites, Batman's plot armor. Alright, hear us out on this one, my friends. Batman has this uncanny ability to always manage to defeat foes who, objectively speaking, could straight up murder him 5 times over. This is because the Caped Crusader is always prepared. It's like his shtick. And it's his plot armor. Plot armor is a term that refers to a character's unusual ability to survive infinite damage due to their importance to the story. And who isn't more important than Batman? I mean, sure, you could argue Superman, but hey, the duo are pretty darn special and arguably the most iconic superheroes of all time. Anywho, just take a look at Batman's history and it's easy to see this happen. Hell, look at the Tower of Babel's story. Batman, being the paranoid and hyper-intelligent individual he is, literally came up with a plan to stop every single superpowered peer of his on the Justice League team, just in case one of them lost their shit and turned bad. I mean, in the long run, it was a good plan, but still, he's obsessive. And he's also rarely outdone because of that. He's arguably one of the only heroes who are a match for the Man of Steel, despite, not having any superpowers whatsoever. Money and brains don't technically count as a superpower, friends. Moving on to number 7, the electromagnetic spectrum vision from Martian Manhunter. Similar to our previous Flash number, here we have a sophisticated ability that occasionally goes over some readers' heads, and hey, not criticizing with that. Scientific logic in comic books is very different than the laws reality follows, as we mentioned earlier. Martian Manhunter, who will be making another appearance on this list a little later on, is a complex character. Yes, he is a green Martian from Mars, but he also is a being who has a plethora of powers, some of which are a little difficult to wrap your head around. Ja'on Jones is capable of seeing across the electromagnetic spectrum. What on earth does that entail? So, you know how Superman has that nifty X-ray vision of his? Now think of this power as a ridiculously amped up version of that. Nicknamed Martian Vision, it allows Ja'on to not only use X-ray vision but to see infrared, ultraviolet, and microwave wavelengths. While we don't entirely know how this is visually represented to the Martian, since there's yet to be a proper POV panel featuring this in DC Comics, or at least that we know of, let us know if we're wrong in the comments. But we can imagine that it would share some similarities to how the Predators in Predators see other kinds of heat signatures or wavelengths, so hey. Speaking of characters with vast skill sets, that brings us to our next number. In at number 6, Shazam, and like all of his powers. Shazam is one of those characters whose befuddling history often leads to those less familiar with the hero getting confused with the full range of his powers and also getting him confused with Marvel's Captain Marvel. But like, there is reason to get confused. So for starters, if you are unaware, Shazam used to be called Captain Marvel back when the character was owned by Fawcett Comics, the original publisher who created Billy Batson back in the Golden Age. Back then, he would say the word Shazam and he would be transformed from a boy to a grown man with superpowers. That still remains the same. DC though would eventually buy out the rights to Fawcett properties after DC basically sued them for the character being too similar to Superman. Fawcett essentially went bankrupt. It's actually pretty tragic. Now by that time, Marvel had already published their Captain Marvel, so DC changed the character's name to Shazam moving forward so there wouldn't be any confusion and more lawsuits. If that wasn't confusing enough, let's take a look at the abilities that Shazam has. And also just to clear this up, when he says Shazam, the magic word, that is also the name of the wizard who gave Billy his powers, but it's also an acronym for what his powers do. Shazam is made up of the names and abilities of 6 immortal elders. First there's Solomon, who gives him his wisdom. Then there's Hercules, who gives him his strength. Atlas, who has stamina and invulnerability. Zeus, which gives him immortality, electricity generation and manipulation, power over lightning, and basically all things electric. Next up is Achilles, who gives him his willpower and superhuman durability. And courage. And lastly, Mercury, who gives him his speed and flying abilities. All in all, there is a lot going on there, and it's a lot more detailed than what we just went through. It would be easy to see how some of those abilities could be confusing to some, especially when there is that common belief that Shazam is basically just Superman but goofier, which he kind of is, to be fair. Moving on to number 5, Ink. Our next baffling character is a Marvel creation who first appeared in Young X-Men issue 1 from 2008, and his powers are his tattoos. Yes, no joke, this fellow, whose real name is Eric Gitter, gets all of his abilities from his tattoos, his body ink, and has no actual superpowers of his own. Ink has access to a mutant tattoo artist who gave superpowers to individuals via his iconic power symbols that he would tattoo onto their skin. Now, Ink's tattoos consist of a biohazard symbol to make his foes extremely sick, a symbol that allows him to heal others, one that gives him super strength, wings on his back that grant him flight, a nuclear symbol in case he, wants to create a deadly nuclear explosion, a red cross on his neck that gives him self-healing powers, lightning bolts on his temples that lets him read minds, and 2 explosive symbols that allow him to blow up objects and punch through walls. But here's the real kicker, my friends. That tattoo artist, the mutant one, the one with the real abilities, he went into a catatonic state after giving Ink his last tattoo, which was the symbol for the Phoenix Force around his eye. All in all, Ink just kinda sucks. Can't really do anything, and he's just riffing off of this poor mutant tattoo artist, who he then put into a coma. So, yeah. Screw you, Ink.
Number 4, the Silver Agent. Astro City. That's right, Astro City time. I love Astro City and we don't talk about it enough. I will make all of the reaches to get characters on it on this list. So Astro City parallels the different eras in the mainstream superhero development, actually historically. So the Silver Agent is their big Silver Age patriotic hero. And okay, so Astro City isn't told in order. Instead, it jumps around to different tales from Astro City's history. So the Silver Agent's tales revealed in bits and pieces. So at the start, we know that he was a hero and that the city has a monument to him, as what happened to him is their greatest shame. So the Silver Agent's story involves time travel, and he is traveling back through his own timeline, and each time he gets a little bit more powerful. So to the city, he appears magical and to just be ever increasing in strength, but really he is being charged by the time travel energy as he moves back and forward further and further. He gains super strength, flight, and more, and with his heroic nature he couldn't not jump in to stop situations he saw unfolding. However, the Silver Agent actually gifted his energy to the city when he returned to be executed for a crime he didn't commit, something only revealed after his death, hence their great shame. Astro City is just a ride. Like how the Samaritan has fought his enemy the Infernal to such a standstill that they just go to dinner once a year to see if either is close to coming over to the other side. I could talk about this all day.
Moving on to number 3, the Negative Man. The Negative Man is a character that first debuted in 1963, a DC creation who has eluded fans for years. I mean, it kinda makes sense as to why he's a member of the Doom Patrol. Negative Man, aka Larry Trainor, is an individual who was accidentally accidentally exposed to a radioactive field in the atmosphere while piloting a test plane. This gave him an interesting set of powers. Not only was he now radioactive, but he had the ability to release negatively charged energy from his body, referred to as the negative spirit or his soul self. Now this soul self is intangible, capable of flight, it can generate minor explosions when it comes into contact with positive energy, and it also acts as a means of temporal astral projection. It's visually represented as a shadowy silhouette of a human being. The downside? Well, Larry's body is physically defenseless when he is separated from it, so he only uses this ability 60 seconds at a time in order to avoid risking death. Now because of his radioactive nature, he wears special bandages that protect those around him, making him look a whole hell of a lot like the Invisible Man, something that can be slightly confusing to those unfamiliar with his character or the Doom Patrol upon first glance. And that, my friends, is exactly why he ends up on this list.
Number 2. Pure Heart. This is Archie Andrews, from that time when Archie was a superhero. Archie comics do what they want, and in 2019 they brought this series back again. So when Archie is Pure Heart, his powers depend on his pH factor, or his pure heart factor, so he can only access his powers if he has a pure heart, hence his name, Pure Heart the Powerful. Here's the thing, he can lose his powers really easily, just one impure thought. So feeling jealous? Boom, powerless. Accept a gift or kiss from a grateful rescuee? Boom, no powers. I hope they don't do it mid-flight, cause then, well, they're both dead.
And finally, in our number 1 spot, Phantom X. First appearing in New X-Men issue 128 from 2000, Phantom X was a character created by the Weapon Plus program to act as a super sentinel against mutants. He's a very convoluted, complex character. So, Mutant Plus does this. They use a process that uses techno-organic organisms whose living tissue is then fused with Sentinel nanotech on a cellular level. Phantom X is birthed from a woman who underwent that process. His mama went through that and he was raised in a place called the World, a man-made environment for these super sentinels. All in all, it is very absurd and peculiar, as are his powers. His nervous system is referred to as something called Eva. This nervous system can come out of his body, yes, like outside of his physical being, and it develops into a techno-organic flying saucer of sorts that he then has a symbiotic relationship with. When Eva is separated from him and in pain, he feels pain. But when he is attacked or someone or something has inflicted damage onto him, he feels nothing, no pain at all, and can ignore those injuries. Phantom X can also see through Eva's point of view, and can control her movement and reshape her form, or body if you will, if he concentrates enough. If that wasn't perplexing enough, Phantom X has microtechnology laced into his blood, which have some eerie effects, prohibiting him from things like believing in anything greater than himself, like gods or supernatural beings or the concept of love. He also can't see colors, which, I mean, in comparison to all the other stuff, is probably not that big of a deal. Dogs can't see colors, so. He can self-heal, and he can alter his body to increase his strength or hearing range. He can also enter a trance in order to perform crucial tasks, such as perform surgery on his own body. All in all, he is a curious character to say the least, and to not entirely understand what he does, I mean, in my opinion, is perfectly acceptable.
Number 10. Dial H. Now this isn't one specific superhero, but rather a comic series featuring a rotary device called the Dial. Though in the most recent 2019 series, it is a phone, a rotary dial phone, that allows the user to access superpowers when they dial Hero, hence Dial H. The title is 100% a play on the Alfred Hitchcock title Dial M for Murder. This series first debuted in the 60s and has had numerous updates since. The first iteration debuted in House of Mystery number 156 back in 1966. In it, Robert Reed fell into a cavern and found the Dial. He then used it to transform into various superheroes, and they would change. He wasn't always the same one. And it wasn't until the 80s that would come into play with existing heroes. Although, there was Plastic Man. Plastic Man was a thing back in the day. Also, other people could use the Dial. It wasn't key to one person or anything. The 80s series also had the added aspect that fans could submit their own heroes and villains, and would get credit and a t-shirt. Over time, the series has evolved into an examination of what it means to be a hero, and how finding the Dial impacts people's lives. Spoilers, it's not always for good. The Dial is pretty random with what hero you become, but that's part of the fun. It's the mystery box superhero power generator. I was gonna say loot box, but you don't have to pay for it. Ayo. Well, I mean not with money, but emotionally, oh yes, you pay.
Up next at number 9, Gwenpool. When Gwenpool first hit the scene in 2015, she was a huge success, becoming instantly beloved amongst fans after merely appearing on the cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. Here is the thing though, many people mistaken her abilities as those of Deadpool's, with her being assumed to be a female version of Wade Wilson. Gwenpool's name may have hilarious relations to Deadpool's thanks to a goof up from her dry cleaner, and the fact that her last name is Poole, spelled P-O-O-L-E. That was something that was retconned after her first appearance, might I add. So if she doesn't share Deadpool's powers, what exactly can she do? Well, she is a brilliant tactician, has vast knowledge of the Marvel Universe, claiming that she is from a timeline in which she read the comics and is now actually a part of them, plus she breaks the fourth wall like it is nobody's business. She knows her way around a whole lot of weapons, is capable of interdimensional travel, and has a regenerative healing factor, which, yes, Deadpool has too, but they're very, very different characters, people. Very different.
Number 8. Jack Hawksmoor. He is a member of the Authority. This is a Justice League-esque team published by Wildstorm Comics, featuring the characters from Stormwatch. Most people know it because Apollo, the Superman pastiche, and the Midnighter, the Batman pastiche, were married. Yes, I said were. People think of other things too, but this comes up a lot. You know it's true. Okay, so Jack Hawksmoor. He debuted in Stormwatch number 37 back in 1996, and has been in the Authority since issue 1. And he can't survive outside of an urban environment, so no trips to the country for him. When in the city, he has superpowers that are tied to the city. These include super strength and agility, just like a city. Telepathic control, and he can animate objects in the city, like the buildings. This varies a little bit from city to city, and Jack acts like each city is a unique entity, which no way they are. City doesn't feel like a word to me anymore. He one time turned a city into a battle suit for him to wear. He also doesn't need to eat because he converts air pollution into sustenance, so he must be doing great. He can transport between cities in a mini womb thing. What's the confusing part here is, why does the city do this to him? He was modified by humans from the 70th century, which caused him to have these powers. You have a lot of freedom with this. You can do some zany things based on the cities he's in. My plan is just to go into a field in the middle of nowhere and stand there. He's done. These modifications were made to him so he could fight a threat from the future. A city-based threat, clearly.
In at 7, The Impossible Man. The Impossible Man hails from Marvel Comics, first appearing in Fantastic Four issue 11 from 1963. He is an alien character from the planet Pop-Up, which yes is a great name, and he has shape-shifting abilities. Plus he was typically used for comedic relief, portrayed as a lonely, attention-seeking extraterrestrial who annoyed the crap out of the Fantastic Four. In addition to his shape-shifting and mimicry abilities, he could also teleport and had an encyclopedic knowledge of Earth culture. So if that description is so straightforward, how did he end up getting on this list? Well, it's because of how the Impossible Man was depicted. His first appearance had him visiting Earth on vacation and assuming that he was the most powerful being on Earth after meeting the Fantastic Four. And then the story consisted of him harassing the team of heroes, wanting to start up an Earth pop-up travel agency. His earlier depictions gave him unlimited shape-shifting powers via molecular rearrangement, but due to his use as a comedic character, the extent of his abilities often fell into befuddling territory, and the full scale of his powers became questionable, since he was also able to mimic the likes of Thor and Wolverine. All in all, looks really funny, doesn't seem like much of a threat, kind of questionable as to what exactly his shape-shifting abilities can do. We know he can, but overall, very baffling.
Number 6. Zatanna. Now you may be thinking, are you both okay? Everyone understands Zatanna, a magician, she speaks backwards, but what some people miss out on is the scale of her powers. Zatanna is actually one of the most powerful sorceresses on Earth, and her powers appear to be inherited. What people tend to misuse or not remember is that her magic increases if not used. So if she doesn't use her magic, it builds to a critical point, which can cause an incident. This is why she releases it in such a controlled manner. However, if she uses too much, she depletes her powers, so she has to find a balance. She can also do spells spoken forward and has done so on rare occasions, and she can also do blood magic. Also, the limits of her powers are not fully defined. So have we seen the ceiling? We don't know. She's dangerous. Don't be fooled just because you could temporarily stop her with some duct tape.
And at number 5, Green Lantern's ability to create kryptonite. Green Lantern's ring can do a whole lot of stuff aside from creating light constructs. It can store a whole lot of crap, including a whole planet, which is kind of insane. But that's not the ring's ability that we're focusing on today, despite how silly that may seem to some. In 1999's Superman Man of Tomorrow issue 13, Green Lantern busts out a brand new trick that seems like a Deus Ex Machina of sorts. Superman was on a rampage, and Martian Manhunter was like, yo, I'm gonna use my telepathy to read the formula for kryptonite from Superman's mind. Yes, just keep following me here, friends. Then he sent that formula to Green Lantern Kyle Rayner to duplicate as a means of fighting the Man of Steel. Supes managed to evade the attack, but it still felt a little extra, almost devaluing the rarity of kryptonite as an organic material. I mean, if Green Lanterns can just create it, like, Superman would pretty much be dead if that got into the wrong hands. Just saying. It makes no sense. And at number 4, boom tube creation from Cyborg. For starters, boom tubes are already mildly confusing. Let's begin with that. Boom tubes are an extra-dimensional point-to-point Einstein-Rosen bridge that are typically opened by a mother box and used as a means of transportation primarily by residents of Apocalypse and New Genesis. New God stuff. While often opened by a mother box, there's a handful of heroes out there who are capable of opening themselves, one of which is Cyborg. The New 52 version of Cyborg altered the hero's origin slightly, by having parademons invade Star Labs after Victor was converted into his cybernetic self. After arguing with his father about what he had been transformed into, he then chased down a parademon and saved a woman on the street from it. But in the process, he absorbed something from a parademon, boom tube technology, which allowed him to transport himself or other individuals. All in all, it is an ability that kind of felt like it was tacked on, but hey, not gonna complain. And at number 3, Kryptonian Coma, talking Superman. Oh, the death of Superman, my absolute favorite story arc ever. That was sarcasm, people, in case you did not pick up on the obvious. Fans of this channel know I have major beef with this arc. Every time it comes up in a video, I go on a tangent about how terrible it was, how it pretty much ruined the concept of death in mainstream comics, and how it was all just a big sham for DC to pull in a bunch of extra dollars. Long story short, and skipping over some of the hilariously bad and nonsensical plot points here, Doomsday comes to Earth. He and Superman engage in what can only be called a punching match to see who can punch harder. They punch each other so hard that they punch each other to death at the same time. And both are believed to be dead, but turns out, surprise, neither is. The problem is, a whole long and painfully tedious story event was drawn out of Superman's death, in which a bunch of dollar store Superman replacements showed up, and a side story where Green Lantern turned homicidal was a thing. He was merely in a Kryptonian coma, which apparently makes it look like he's dead, with no pulse, no breathing, the whole shabam. So everyone in the story was like, whoa, Superman, thank God you're not actually dead, you pulled a fast one on us with that power of yours that makes zero sense, but okay. Perhaps this number is more baffling than confusing, being something that felt so far-fetched rather than a reasonable plot point. It's all about that money grab. Moving on to number 2, quantum tunneling. We're talking the Flash here, friends. Quantum tunneling is just a fancy name for phasing. It is the Flash's ability to vibrate at such a high speed and at such a high intensity that he can pass through solid objects. See what I mean about those two things being a factor in like a bunch of his powers? And here's where it gets real fun and bewildering. In the New 52 and Flash issue 3, Flash depicts the ability to transfer his quantum tunneling to objects that he touches. He phases a whole airplane through a bridge. Scientifically, we're not even going to try to explain how that is possible. We just know that he becomes practically invisible, and in order for this to work, he needs to calculate the frequency of his vibrations, or else it could get real messy. Like phasing through an object halfway and then, you know, getting dead. It's also a power that has varied amongst different iterations of the Flash, with Barry Allen seemingly having a better grasp over it than Wally West. And finally, in our number 1 spot, the 9 senses of Martian Manhunter. Human beings have 5 senses. Martian Manhunter? Well, he's got 9 of them. Aside from being a concept that is strenuous to comprehend, we can't help but be slightly perplexed by what on Earth, or Mars rather, all of those senses possibly do. It almost seems like a completely made up ability that DC just threw into the character's skill set for the fun of it. So out of the 9, 5 are the human senses that we have, but the extra 4 have never fully been defined in the comics. There is a fan theory that one of his 9 senses is a precognitive one. In Martian Manhunter's early days, the character exhibited precognitive abilities. Regardless, John's 9 senses tops our list simply because there is no possible way for us to understand them, simply because they've never really been explained to us. And also, humans can probably better sympathize with 5 senses than a whole extra 4 that we don't have. All we can really do is speculate. We know that Martian vision isn't considered to be one of them, and thanks to JLA Year 1 Issue 6, we know that if his eyes were removed, he would still have the other 8 senses, meaning the additional 4 have nothing to do with vision. But thanks to Jack Kirby, there is reason to believe that those 4 senses are chopped up to abilities that he was shown as having in Detective Comics issue 226, in his second appearance ever. Those include telepathy, telekinesis, empathetic precognition, and molecular hypnosis, although those tend to be listed as separate powers of his these days compared to being one of the 9 senses. So all in all, a little confusing. Oh boy. Starting us off in at number 10, Crystal. Crystal is a character associated with a ton of different groups in the Marvel Universe. She is the Inhuman Princess, yet throughout her history she has appeared associated with different groups, the likes of the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and to a lesser extent, the X-Men. She was exposed to the Terrigen Mist and gained psionic control over the elements of earth, fire, air, and water, and other natural materials by extension, which kind of makes her powers slightly confusing. All in all though, she is a character who has a whole lot going on, and has a history that is perplexing at best. She first appeared in Fantastic Four issue 45 in 1965, appearing alongside the Inhuman royal family. She fell hard for the Human Torch Johnny Storm, and briefly joined the Fantastic Four team because of this. She was written out of the team though in Fantastic Four issue 105 after Jack Kirby departed from the title. Then she had a stint where she fell for Quicksilver, whom she had a daughter with named Luna. Wanda. Then she rejoined the Fantastic Four, left again a year after that, and then in 1991 became an Avenger. Hope you guys are following. That stint lasted for a handful of years until 1998 when she returned to Adelan, making guest appearances in various stories for years to come. Eventually, in her timeline, we hit the all-new, all-different Marvel, where she led her own team of Inhumans and got a brand new look which consisted of a pixie cut, and looked very different than her previous depictions. Overall, Crystal seems like she was birthed from a promising idea, but never really managed to find a place in the comics for decades, hence her constant flux throughout the Marvel Universe. Up next at 9, Rainbow Girl. Rainbow Girl lands on this list thanks to her very confusing powers. We've actually discussed the character on our series of superpowers no one understands, which you should definitely check out in case you haven't already. Rainbow Girl is an extraterrestrial character from the planet of Zolnar. A metahuman, her abilities consist of wielding the powers of the mysterious emotional spectrum, resulting in unpredictable mood swings. In other words, she is an inherently sexist character. But it gets worse. So her real shtick is that she taps into different colors that result in different emotions. Red is anger, blue is hope, green is willpower, which also is a little bit baffling. But she can also create a pheromone field around herself that looks like a rainbow. It gives her an irresistible personality to everyone, because it's not just looks that matter, it's personality too, right? Right? Jeez, God, DC, could you be any more on the nose? Here's the kicker though. How do these powers work? Well, it turns out even Rainbow Girl has zero clue. According to Jeff Johns, she doesn't fully understand her powers, but rather, she uses them more so for fun. In at number 8, Nebula. Similar to some of the characters we discussed on part 1 of this list, Nebula can often be considered befuddling due to the differences between her comic iteration and her MCU adaptation. Nebula in the MCU is Thanos' adoptive daughter, who suffered from the Mad Titan's onslaught of biomodifications. The version in the comics though is his granddaughter, a fact that Thanos initially refused to accept as truth and led to the tyrant severely abusing her during the Infinity Gauntlet storyline. Thanos tortured her by having her constantly on the brink of death, never dying but barely living, which Thanos would boast to be his greatest creation. After he had all but won and defeated those who opposed him after his now famous snap that wiped out half of all living things, she would take advantage of the fact that he had expanded his consciousness into the universe, and therefore left his body in a comatose state. So what'd she do? She took the gauntlet from him, and restored herself to her full health, and banished him. Then she decided to use it to try to conquer the universe, which, thanks to her inexperience with it, was a plan that was thwarted by Adam Warlock and company. A year later, she would be converted into a cyborg in the 3rd volume of the Silver Surfer comics, and would return much later in the Annihilation story event that made her fellow pals in the current iteration of the Guardians of the Galaxy popular, the same ones who would then be adapted into the MCU. Full circle. Up next at 7, Raven. DC's Raven is a character who helped revolutionize the Teen Titans, created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez back in 1980. She is a powerful empath who senses emotions and can control something called her soul self, which is essentially an astral body. She is capable of various kinds of magic and sorcery, and has become one of the most prominent members of the Titans over the years. But she's also got a demonic father named Trigon who causes her a whole lot of strife, and constantly thrusts her into narratives where she's turned evil thanks to his influence. Hence the confusion around the character over the years. Remember that time she got hella weird and erotic with Starfire when she interrupted her wedding to Dick Grayson and then disintegrated the priest? Well, technically she interrupted the wedding by disintegrating the priest, but you guys know what I mean. There's a whole lot of that kind of stuff in the comics, but perhaps an even stranger moment in her history was after the New 52 reboot, when DC decided to put her in a Raven costume, in which she was called Trigon's Blackbird of Terror. It seems as if Raven is a consistent character up until Trigon makes his frequent appearances in her life and then screws her up all over again, making it hard for readers to keep up. And at number 6, Gwenpool. Who is Gwenpool? Is she a female version of Deadpool? Is she Gwen Stacy as Deadpool? What's her deal? We want to know. Those are the questions that land her a spot on this list. Gwenpool, whose real name is Gwendolyn Poole, Poole spelled with an E at the end, is a character who originated as an amalgamation of Gwen Stacy and Deadpool on a variant cover of Deadpool's Secret Wars issue 2. This occurred thanks to the increasing popularity of Spider-Gwen at the time. Now eventually, seeing the popularity the character on the variant cover had, Marvel created 2 stories featuring her, one of which was a backup story in a Howard the Duck comic. Here, a retcon occurred. Her name was revealed to be Gwen Poole, and in her following solo series, it was revealed that she was a character who had come from another universe in which she was privy to the comic book characters and all of the heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe. She claims that she is from the real world, like our world, and unwilling to be an extra in these stories, after arriving in the Marvel Universe, she got her own costume made. The tailor misunderstood her request based off of her name, which he believed was misspelt, thinking that she wanted a costume similar to Deadpool's, thus creating her a Deadpool-esque outfit. Apparently he also had a surplus of pink material, and Gwen had pink highlights in her hair, hence why he made it into a pink costume. So there you have it, friends. Gwenpool has no relation to Deadpool whatsoever, minus appearing on a variant cover. And also having someone mistaken her name.
Number 5. Endo-Sim Armor. This first debuted in the Superior Iron Man #1 in 2014. So in 2014, Marvel had an event called Axis, which many do not remember too fondly. Cliff notes: Avengers and X-Men versus the Red Skull controlling Xavier and Onslaught. After all of this, Tony's personality was flipped, so now he was Dark Tony. And so he created the Armor Mark 50, a smart liquid metal mesh incorporating symbiote elements. What could go wrong? Also, I can't hear liquid metal without thinking about Terminator 2. It's actually kinda sad. This was a mindless artificial symbiote that was entirely controlled via artificial intelligence, and then cast aside when Tony's personality flipped back. Superior Iron Man was an interesting time. 100% it just existed because of how well Superior Spider-Man had done. But you know, that one had stakes. Shots fired, I'm sorry. I actually have a soft spot for the aesthetic of this armor. Number 4. Magic Venom. Getting real recent now. Magic Venom debuted in Venom Volume 4 number 13 in 2019, and has ties to the War of the Realms event. The one that people on the outside like to make fun of because the lead villain is Malekith, the dark elf from Thor 2 The Dark World. Well, he was from elsewhere first, but that's where many know him from now. And there's been this odd campaign to make Thor 2 relevant again. It's been very interesting. War of the Realms actually starts with him already having conquered all the other realms, so you're stuck in the lamest one. This one, Midgard, Earth. Again, I live here. Give me Alfheim or Valheim, somewhere else. Anyways, everyone has to band together and stop him. In this arc, Eddie and Venom are separated, so he is given a Dream Stone by a dark elf who is hoping to recruit him. The Dream Stone acts as an artificial symbiote, but is a mindless one, and Eddie ultimately uses pieces of the suit to save civilians. Number 3. Spider-Man India. So Spider-Man India was a miniseries that lasted 4 issues in between 2004 and 5, and blended elements of Spider-Man mythos with more mythological elements. The concept was conceived by an Indian director who had met with Stan Lee to discuss creating an Indian superhero. Symbiotes in this universe are demons, fanged, tusked demons who once ruled but were captured in an amulet. When the amulet was found, it turned the host into the Green Goblin. The demon would hop from the Green Goblin to Spider-Man, but be expelled, but before this it is called Venom. The amulet is destroyed, but not Venom. He's always a menace, no matter the Earth. Number 2. The Beyonder. For this version, we have to go to yet another one of Marvel's humor issues. These issues have brought us such gems as What If Black Panther Was White? Now I give you The Beyonder. Just let the pun wash over you. Live in it. Be the pun. This comes to us from the What the ? A self-parodying comic series for silly jokes. Its tagline was, the Marvel Mag of Mirth and Mayhem. The Beyonder is this universe's version of the Beyonder, who gives Spider-Ham a version of the black uniform. But it's not a symbiote. I just want to tell you about the Beyonder. It's fun to say for me, but it's probably not fun for you to listen to. Number 1. Scorn. Scorn first debuted in Carnage number 5 in 2011. So Scorn was created out of a piece of Carnage left in space after Carnage was torn in half by the Sentry, but he got better. The Sentry may be one of the most powerful beings out there, but Carnage has plot armor and sells comics, so take that, Sentry. The pieces are collected to attempt to create prosthetic limbs, so the first thing that the symbiote bonds to is a prosthetic arm. Because of this, Scorn can bond to technology. Now this is an element that some find confusing, and also there are other story elements that make Scorn a bit convoluted. Things like how Cassidy was alive and had been preserved by Carnage and was repaired by these prosthetics. Again, you can't kill Carnage. Scorn was eventually corrupted by Null, the symbiote god, and started a cult to worship him. She was killed by Carnage after offering herself to him. Absolute carnage. There is so much carnage going on right now.